Okay, yeah. So we're live. There will be a bit of delay, but yeah. So, hey everyone, thanks for joining. For this session of the Expert Tech Talks, we have with us Thiyagarajan, or Rajan for short. So he's a partner at Upekkha, an SAS startup accelerator. And he would be so Upekkha, first of all, guides many entrepreneurs and helps them reach a revenue of over $1 million, and inspires them to make that push for success. So he's with us today to answer all of our questions, regarding SAS, startups, and a lot more. So, hi Rajan.
Hi Aditya, hi Chandan.
So you want to say anything before we start?
I'm very excited to be here. It just transports me back to my college days. So I'm just very excited to see what kind of conversation we can have for the next hour or so.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sounds good then. So we'll get right into it then. All right. So the first question, Rajan. So yeah, again, note to the audience. At the end of the session, we will be having an audience round. So you're requested to put up all your questions on the live chat, and we'll take them up one by one. And if you have a really complex question or something that you really want to ask, which may not be able to do it over live chat, you can join the meet link. We'll send it in some time, and you can ask it. You can just join in and ask him. Right. So Rajan, the first question is, could you just give us an insight as to why you started up? And yeah, you can take that first.
Sure. So there are two parts to why I started up. I was an entrepreneur 12 years ago, and most recently I started the SaaS accelerator. And the SaaS accelerator is me working with a lot of SaaS founders and startups together. So when I initially started up, it was again my time at college, and I saw that there were many people who were cool and who were making impact were people who were entrepreneurs. So I graduated from this college called IIIT Hyderabad, and many entrepreneurs used to come and give talks like this, and that used to inspire me. People like I would say Chandrasekhar, people like Kanwal Rekhi, who had built really big businesses, who went from India, went to the US, and created large, impactful businesses and created big societal impact. So people who created impact in a large kind of a way, I saw entrepreneurs were there. Entrepreneurs were the ones that were doing that. So that's how I got my entrepreneurial bug bitten, and then I did a bunch of startups after I graduated from college. 3 years after I graduated from my college, I took a shot at a startup. Then I built a consumer startup, and then I worked in the mobile and the SaaS industry for quite some time. So the last 10 years, I've been working in the SaaS industry, in the B2B industry, playing different roles and capacities, and being a product leader, and being working with founders on like official and unofficial capacity. And when I was at Intuit, I realized that you can also be founders. And there was this person called Bill Campbell, who was the chairman at Intuit, and he had worked with a lot of founders who were creating impact. So there were these founders who were creating this impact, like Kanwal Rekhi and others. But then Bill Campbell chose to work with other founders like Kanwal Rekhi. I mean, he's literally worked with all the top founders in the world, whether it is Jeff Bezos, whether it is the Google founders, or his first close collaborator was some Steve Jobs. So he had worked with them and helped them create a lot of impact. So I had gone through my entrepreneurial journey, then I was into it. So I was really inspired by what Bill did. So I was a founder myself, but I also liked the journey of working with other founders. And India also was going through this cusp of where startups was becoming very, very prominent. We are a very young ecosystem when it comes to startup. And we as Indians, we have this great penchant at building software. So as a country, we were going to start this transition of going from IT services to product. So I decided, why don't I take some of my background and experience and work with great founders from India that are building global brands, just like how Bill Campbell was able to impact Steve Jobs, Larry Sergey. And that's how I started Upekkha, the SaaS accelerator. which is to
Okay.
help Indian founders build global brands. So we've seen Microsoft and we've seen Google, where we have exported Indians as the CEOs to those country. But how do we create Microsoft and Google from India itself? And how do we rise higher into the value chain? And SaaS gives us that opportunity. That becomes a important advantage for us building startups from India. So a lot of these combination, a lot of this backstory led to creating the Upekkha, the SaaS accelerator, to work with
Okay.
Indian founders that are building global brands.
All right. All right. So Chandran, you want to take the next one?
All right. So the next question is something which I'm pretty sure everyone actually has as a question as such. So suppose we have a particular idea and we feel that that idea would be really successful if it is implemented, and all of us tend to actually think that that is the case. So actually, how do you validate your idea to exactly know whether or not it's actually will actually be consumed? And second, are there any services that allow you to do so, or do you just learn by trial or error? How do you validate the idea as such?
So about 10 years ago, I used to use the language of validation. More recently, I have gone away from the language of using validation, and I will tell you why. There is no way for you to validate a movie before you shoot the movie, you release the movie, and see the audience reaction. You can go through a lot of experience of being working as an assistant director to other people or acting in other movies and being thoughtful about picking the next role, but there is just no possible way for you to validate a movie idea at all. Instead, what you can have is that you can have great conviction that this will work, and that great conviction gets built through experiences that you have gone through. So by idea validation, I'm guessing most people are trying to figure out, hey, here is this unique novel idea that popped in my head. If I take this to customers, will they pay money for it, or will they even use it? That's what typically you think about, or when you say the words like,
Right.
how do I validate this idea? But you develop conviction through a lot of experience. So there is no other way to then just do trial and error to know that this idea is going to work. And many people become successful because in the past they have done trial and error. Before Facebook became a huge hit, Mark Zuckerberg tried two or three other ideas in the consumer space, and they had different successes in those. Not a commercial success, but they were all great use success. Like the previous projects that he built, they were all adopted by the college kids. And then he said, okay, I'm going to come up with Facebook. So trial and error is really the way. There is no service that is out there that will tell you. Just like how there is no service that is out there that will tell you if the movie that you are going to create can be validated or not.
Okay.
All right. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So another thing. So, I've heard this a lot. Find a co-founder who complements your skills. So, what does complement here mean? Could
Right.
you
So
expand on that?
yeah, so
Yeah.
entrepreneurship is not a single player game. What does it mean is it is not like Wimbledon.
Right.
Doing entrepreneurship is more like playing cricket. Now, if you're playing cricket, you can be the best all-rounder in the world. You can be MS Dhoni. You can know how to bowl well, field well, bat well, etc. But you will have to bring together a team if you want to win in that particular game. So while you may independently have the skills of what to build, why to build it, and how to build something new, but you will have to bring people on board together to get that. So in your team, you need a batsman, bowler, and a fielder, right? In your team, if you're building a tech startup, you need a hacker, a hustler, and a designer. Hacker is someone who's going to build stuff. Hustler is someone who's going to go and sell stuff, and designer or a product guy who's going to bring all of these things together. So the real question to ask is what type of a role you are playing and what type of a role is gap in the team. So if you're a great batsman, right, you have to figure out, hey, who's going to be a good bowler and who's going to be a good fields person, right? So if you're a hacker, if you know how to build stuff, then you need to find out members in your team who can be good at sales and who can be good at, let's say, design slash product. Now, what ends up happening is that if you are great batsmen, if you're working in engineering college, if you know how to build, we are only hanging out with other batsmen, right, who are really good at it. And those people that we hang out with is who we go and say, hey, come and join me. But if you built a cricket team which had all 11 batsmen, you know that it is not going to be very successful, right? So when you think about co-founders, you want to think about complementary skills. But then if you have to think about complementary skills, you have to think about where do these people hang out. You are only familiar with hanging out with other batsmen or engineers, people who know how to build. So you want to do projects with people who are outside of your domain. And when you're building a team, usually I think about this in this very simple way. Like in a team that you put together, you need to get your chemistry, physics, and the math right in that order. What does it mean? That if you're working with someone, you want to figure out that you will hit it off with each other as a team member. Because the journey of a startup is a very long journey, and it is going to test all your strengths, all your limits. So if the slightest trouble comes, and the person that is trying to work with you, if he says, you know what, I'm going to bail out, then that is not going to help you at all. So you want to figure out how is the chemistry that is going to work. So you want a complementary skill. You want somebody who's outside your domain. If you are someone who's building, then you want to find someone who's good at selling. But then do small projects together to figure out whether your chemistry will work together with each other or not. And that's how I would say think about co-founder. Now usually what I see is people come and say, hey, I want a CTO. But since you guys are in an engineering college, you're not asking that question that I need a CTO. You are perhaps asking this question that, how do I find a business guy? And some of you may have a penchant to go onto the business side. So just think about it this way, saying, if my startup is a cricket team, who's batsman, bowler, and who's a wicket keeper, or the simpler very tactical thing is who is going to build, who is going to sell, and who is going to put all of these things together. If I'm good at selling, or if I'm good at building, where do I find these other two people? How do I do a simple project with them to figure out as a team, can we collaborate with each other or not? And that experience will lead you to find more and more teams as you go forward. And like we saw in the Facebook movie, right? So initially there was this Eduardo Saverin and Mark Zuckerberg. They were roommates together. They thought they had complementary skills. It did not work out, and it created a lot of rupture between their relationships. Many people think that the biggest reason for a startup to fail is because you couldn't find what is called as a product market fit, or the idea couldn't be validated. But what people undercount is more startups fail because co-founders couldn't get along well. So therefore, this is a much more important piece of building a startup than just doing idea validation. Does that help, Aditya?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so Chandran.
Yeah, all right. So the next question which I wanted to ask you was with respect to um, there are so many people who are actually like really smart at what they do, but they don't necessarily make good entrepreneurs. So between management, leadership, people skills, and technical skills, which are the most relevant with respect to a founder? How exactly would you rank them in order?
So one way I think about founder is I call them as a T-shaped person who is more a generalist in the sense that he knows a little bit of many things. And then there are people who become specialists. So if you take someone who's good at engineering and they start building, and that's the career that they build, or somebody who's good at sales, they start with a junior sales guy, become a senior sales guy, and then become a more senior sales guy, a VP, director of sales, and a VP sales, or marketing for that matter. But a founder or an entrepreneur is someone who's someone who knows a little bit of selling, little bit of building. There are few core skills that a founder must have in terms of he needs to be able to rally and build a great team together. So building high performance team is a core skill for a founder. A sales guy doesn't have to know, an engineer doesn't have to know, or a marketing person doesn't have to know in depth of how do you build high performing team. Founder's core job is to make decision under ambiguous condition. It is almost like taking a trip to Mars. You don't know the map. You are just navigating into abyss, and you don't have a lot of guidance for that is available for you. So decision making under uncertain environment, building a great team, and being able to manage yourself, manage your own psychology. These are some core skills. But then they know a little bit of marketing, little bit of sales, little bit of engineering, little bit of strategy, little bit of product management, all these other vertical or specialist skills. So if you think about it, if you imagine this, Then there is a T-shaped person. So there is a core skill, and then there is little bit of many of these other skills. But someone who is really good at one particular vertical or specialist, a management specialist, he's really good at marketing. He's really good at sales, and that's where they grow. So the T-shaped versus I-shaped is a fundamental difference, or what is also called as a generalist versus a specialist. So a founder is the ultimate generalist. He doesn't know a lot of skills, but is really good at picking up some element of the skills which are good enough for him to make progress. As he grows the business, then he will bring specialists into the team and say, hey, you know what, now you grow the team. So that's the fundamental difference between an entrepreneur slash founder and a general leader or a general management person.
Right, right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Right. So the next question is, regarding your college degree. So there is this perception that, the IIT tag can easily get you VC money or any other help or service that a founder might require. So how true is this?
So I would say it is both true and less true now. 10 years ago, it was more true. But over a period of time, what has happened is that has changed. There is this saying amongst people in the professional circle that you are as good as your last job title, right? Or you are as good as your last degree. So if you don't have a last job title, then people look at your last degree. So in the startup world as well, 10 years, 12 years ago, if you had an IIT, IIM degree, or if you had a Harvard, Stanford degree, you used to get funded. You would get a lot of doors that open for you. But at least the last 10 years that have shown is that in the Indian ecosystem, I can certainly say that for B2B is that people who had IIT, IIM degrees and got funded are not the ones that who have created the more impactful startups. So today, the startups that are more impactful, at least in the B2B space, are companies like Freshworks and ChargeBee and Zoho and others. And these are what I would call as Aam Aadmi founders. They didn't have any IIT degree, they didn't have IIM degrees. And if I compare and contrast that with startups that were funded 12 years ago, which had IIT degrees and IIM degrees, they didn't do well. And investment is a job of finding outliers, right? So usually what happens is, like in even HR or even in recruitment, right? So some big company will want to prefer to go to a well-known, well-established college because they don't want to do the work. They don't have the time. So they are like, okay, if I just look at this tag, maybe that is good enough to know how good and how skilled they are. Now, if you're doing a general recruitment, that is great. But if you are in the business of finding outliers, like how investors are in the venture space, for them, they have to use different techniques to find the outliers. So those who missed out by looking only at IITs and IIMs have learned their lessons. Now they are looking at
Okay.
saying, hey, how do I look at those outliers and how do I go beyond the IIT and the IIM tags? And the smart ones are doing it. There are still few who still go to the IITs and the IIM tags as the shortcut. Or the newer shortcut right now is that those who are working or who have come out of existing successful startup, like some founder came out of Flipkart or some founder came out of Freshworks, they get more preference. But that again is not a good indicator of whether this founder has that T-shaped skill and he's an outlier that an investor can find and bet more. So the short answer is, it still matters, it still happens, but it happens way less than how it used to happen before. And predominantly because many people who made that bet before, they realized how wrong they were. And they have at least updated their own way of thinking to saying, hey, how do I like truly find the right person? Those who still go after IITs and IIMs, they are the ones that are now going to learn the lesson for the next 10 years because they're going to use a shortcut.
So
Right?
I
Which
mean, what about NITs then? Like we can be kind of like IIT, we have a bit of a brand and also Aam Aadmi, right?
in today's day and age, Aditya, what I would say is that, see, you guys are doing this YouTube thing, right? In this, you are establishing your own brand, right?
Right.
So as you guys are thinking about things in a much more independent, on your own way, you should be able to establish your own independent brand, which even surpasses the NIT brand or the IIT brand. That is what is possible today with social media. That is what is possible today through YouTube. So you don't even have to be a Aam Aadmi founder. You have to be a Aditya founder, right?
Okay.
To stand out and create this thing for you.
All right. So the next one, I think I'll just ask that. So Upekkha is a SaaS, that is software as a service, accelerator. So what is the idea behind SaaS?
So SaaS is actually a 15-year, 20-year-old idea. It's a new way of building and delivering software that came into the industry. The easiest way to think about this is that, like, if some of you have had experience with DOS or even Microsoft Office, it used to come in a CD. Software was available always in a CD. You would install Windows 95, you would install Office 95, or you would install MS 2000 and 2010 and things like that using a CD. Now, when software was built that way, it was distributed using CDs. So it was something that was very intangible, but it was only represented through CDs. But what internet did was, it said, if you want to experience software, you don't have to turn them into the CDs and ship them out. I would just make them available online on a website, and you can just experience that. And coupled with that, what happened was people started looking for solutions online. So earlier, when these CDs were shipped, that's how software was built and sold. People would go door to door and knock their doors and say, "Hey, are you looking for this kind of problem to solve? Here is a CD that will solve the problem for you." Now, in case of in consumer case, it would be an office, but in case of, let's say, a big enterprise, it will be Oracle database or Oracle CRM and things like that. Now, as the world changed from shipping CDs to experiencing it online, people also started calling that as cloud. The delivery of software, the discovery of the software, and also how software gets paid changed. So if I were to use a simple metaphor, software was earlier sold like how houses were built and sold, in which you will just exchange license agreement. Right there, it will say that, look, you own this particular CD, and there is a license agreement that I give to you that you cannot sell the CD further, but you can use it on your own. And people would experience that software through the CD installation that they would do. But now they said, look, I will not ship you the CD, I will not give you the entire house, I will literally rent it to you. So software as a service is this idea of doing renting as opposed to giving the ownership of software. Now, what that means is, earlier this software used to be very, very expensive. But now, because of renting, it is more like you paying monthly fee for the usage of that software. So earlier you would buy it for, let's say, 80 lakh rupees to own that entire software, install it in your own computer. But now you would go to your computer and type things salesforce.com and then just pay 20,000 rupees for that per month. So software as a service, SaaS, is turning ownership into renting of usage of software because of underlying cloud change, underlying technology changes that happened. Does that help?
Right. Okay, so again, another question relating to SaaS. So I guess when you have a website or something or any software that you can either provide advertisements on it and make revenue using that, or you can kind of like license your software. So obviously, which one is better? Obviously, the answer is it depends. So how does it depend?
So the advertisement versus license, I would say it depends on the type of the user. If it is very consumer driven, right? Even in consumer driven world, Microsoft Office was not available on advertisement, right? But Google search was available on advertisement. So something where it is a very utilitarian need, right? And there is a certain amount of scale that is involved. These are business model questions, right? Whether it is advertisement or whether it is someone who will pay for it. And people have tried out different models, and they saw that in some cases like search, people don't want to pay for such software, even if it is like in case of consumer. But when it is enterprises, when there are businesses that are buying, they always care about continuity. So even if there was open source software that was available, like Linux, they would want a Red Hat to come and be there to run the maintenance. So when it came to enterprises, It was never about advertisement. I can't literally think of any business, B2B business, buying a software that they want, whether web application or license CD, where they dependent on a advertisement model. But in case of consumer, it depended on the type of services. So if you're building B2B, it is totally either you license to purchase it completely upfront, or you rent it out for many months together, right? So that would be the fundamental difference. In B2C, which is more consumer, which is more, I would say, subscription based, it also depended on how easy it is to make payments. Right? So like 10, 20 years ago, it was very, very hard for you to build businesses where you could just collect 1 rupee, 2 rupee, 10 rupee. But today with UPI, you can do it. So today
Right.
with UPI, you can do a lot of subscription based businesses that you could not do before. So how payment systems worked, that has determined a lot in terms of whether it was a advertisement based business model or a subscription based business model. If you ask me, from someone who's building a business, a subscription based business model is way better if you can pull
Okay.
it off. But industry has gone from subscription being really important to advertising being really important to subscription being again important. Like, let me give the example of newspapers. So in the 50s and the 60s, there were subscriptions that were there for newspapers that you used to buy. There, the ad component used to be really, really small, right? And
Right.
over a period of time in the 90s and the 2000, the 2010, ad component became really big, and the subscription became really, really small. But in the last 5 to 8 years, if you're following New York Times, the ad revenue contribution to New York Times is way lesser than the subscription end of it. So as time has changed, even in consumer, advertisement versus subscription has changed in terms of their importance. But by and large, they depended on how easy it was to collect payments.
All right. All right.
All right. So the next question, which I think I'm sure most entrepreneurs get as such, what are some of the early mistakes which founders make on their journey to actually creating and establishing their startup?
One of the most biggest mistake that I see founders make is that they are way too self-centered, in the sense that they're sitting inside their houses or their offices and writing code or building. They don't step out and talk to people outside to figure out what they're building, does it make sense. They should be talking to advisors, customers, partners, to figure out whether whatever they are building is worth building or not. I often used to say that if you are going to keep secrets from the market is going to keep secrets from you. I often think that, the ideas that they are coming up with is so unique that if they talked about that idea with someone else, then that someone else will steal the idea. Now, if your idea was such that anyone else knowing that idea itself can build it, then it is not going to be a good solid business for you to build anyway. So the biggest mistake is to make sure that you have spoken to people outside and don't spend years after years just building, because the moment you are going to hit the reality, the moment you are going to touch someone real on the ground, that's when all your assumptions will get tested. And the sooner you can do it, the better it is. The second thing I would say is something that I already talked about. Founders, they become co-founders with people that are similar to themselves. They don't spend that time to think through saying, hey, if I'm building my cricket team, I shouldn't be recruiting another batsman. I should be recruiting another bowler. I should be recruiting other wicket keepers, so that I can build a complementary team to, like, have a shot at winning the game. These are two most lethal mistakes. And if these two mistakes are taken care of, then I think the survival rate of a startup will increase many-fold. And after that, you just have to think about startup as a long game. If you survive for long enough, then you are bound to be successful. So most founders, they have a very short horizon of how long it takes for a startup to succeed. They think, hey, I'm going to do this for 6 months, I'm going to do this for 9 months, and then I'll have figured out the answers. But startups, for it to become successful, it takes very, very long. I'm sure most of you would have heard this. It takes 15 years to become an overnight success, right? So it takes 15 years for you to become a really successful startup. So having this longer term thinking and saying, how do I be around for that longer term? And how do I prepare myself externally and also psychologically to play that long game is also something that I have seen a lot of founders make mistakes around.
Yeah, Aditya, over to you. Aditya, you muted. Just unmute, no?
Yeah.
I think you're still muted, Aditya.
Yeah, you just muted again.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah. So do you think dropping out of college for a startup is advisable? Yes or no? And more than this, you've seen many founders, like in famous founders, Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey, Bill Gates. All of them were all college dropouts. But then again, in India, where there's much more social pressure for completing education, do you think this is advisable? And also, along with this, what about starting up right after college? Or does one actually need some experience in the working field before starting? Yeah.
So no college experience prepares you for startup, and no corporate experience also prepares for you for a startup. So if you're working in a large company, it's more like you've joined a train running company in Japan, or like you've joined Indian Railway, where there are systems and these systems are going to run trains on time, and you join some department in that and then figure out how to run the system on time. A startup is more like either you're going on a Mount Everest journey or you're going on a Star Trek trip where no man has gone before. So whether you do it just right after college or before college, to take a Mount Everest trip or to a trip to Mars, it doesn't prepare you that way. But for you to do a startup, you have to have deep understanding of a domain. Right? So let's say if you start just after college, or even if you drop out of college, it is going to take, regardless of whether you're building a consumer startup or a B2B startup, it is going to take literally 2 to 3 years for you to understand the domain that you're working in. Let's say you're building Snapchat, or you're building some sales related and B2B software. You will have to spend 2 to 3 years to figure out like what really happens there. So there is a mythology around, if you drop out then you do better, versus you need to have some experience. The experience that you want to have is more relevant with the type of startup that you want to build, and that is what is going to be important, not whether you drop out or whether you take corporate related experience. Because people who have worked in corporate for 10-15 years, they try to start a startup and still doesn't help. The difference between somebody who is starting just after college and somebody who has, let's say, 15 years of experience is that they are fresh with ideas. They don't have the burn of or the scars of an experience saying, oh, I tried this did not work, so I don't want to try. So they're always brimming up with new idea and new energy to try out new ideas. Because just because some idea did not work 10 years ago doesn't mean that it is not going to work again. Right? Because you don't step the same river twice. You are not the same, the river is not the same. Which means that you can look at the same idea through fresh pair of lens, and that's why young founders are able to challenge conventions. But the mythology about dropping out is, for every one person that dropped out, there are 9 other person who dropped out and did not make it big. So we should not take too much out of that, of saying, hey, dropping out is great. There is a little bit of a story bias or a narrative bias or a success bias there, because we are only going to tell about the stories of those who made it big, not the stories of who dropped out, did not finish college, and couldn't get a decent enough job and did not become successful entrepreneurs. So the experience that I'm saying that you need is more around being around the startup. So if you are in the long term looking to do a startup, then join a startup, because you will be in the troop that is making a Mount Everest climb of their own. And once you have learned that experience, then you can do on your own. But doing a large company experience is not going to prepare you for a startup.
All right. So on a related note, as you said, right, about various skills or qualities which a entrepreneur should have, from being T-shaped, from being a generalist, or to having all the other qualities which you mentioned. Now, on a slightly related note, who shouldn't start a startup? Like, what kind of person would you look at and say you should try to stay away from it? What are the qualities which a person should say use to self-assess that they're not meant to start?
I would say that anybody should be able to build those T-shaped rules. But if I were to look at this anti-framing of who should not do a startup, I would say anybody who is going to feel challenged in putting themselves into a super fast learning position. So when you are doing a startup, it is like you're sitting in this rocket ship and you're facing the gravity at 10x, right? Which means completely deranged out of that experience. So you will have to force yourself in becoming a fast learner. So who I have seen that become really successful is founders that are able to always put themselves into this path of fast learning. One of my experience has been that if a startup has to grow 2x, then the founder himself has to grow 3x. Maybe you are an engineering founder and you don't know the skill of sales or marketing or negotiation or fundraising or things like that. And literally few months you have to figure out those skills and have to become decently good enough and really good enough, in a sufficiently longer period of time. So you have to be the fastest learner, and the pace of fast learning is something that you don't enjoy, right? You don't want to put yourself into this path of this pressure. Then you should, check yourself out of the founder or the startup path. So if you don't enjoy fast learning, putting yourself into uncomfortable positioning, learning that skill and surviving and emerging from there, you should be a founder. But if you are afraid of that, or if you don't enjoy that, then being a founder or an entrepreneur is not for you as a game.
Yeah. So the next question is about the kind of culture you have to, build in your company. So you've started a company and it's pretty small now. There's some hope that, it grows really well later. So what kind of culture should there be in your startup, and how do you build that?
See, culture is a very broad set of words. If I were to
Right.
use a very simple explanation for culture, it is a shared belief. Not just shared belief in what you believe, but shared belief in action. What are you doing, and show action as a shared belief. And what happens with something like shared belief is out of the experiences that we go through life, out of the communities that we come through, and out of the colleges that we go to, out of the networks that we hang out. So some of our culture, if we have a certain religious preference, then we have a certain culture. If we belong to a certain college, then we have a certain culture. If we belong to a certain community, we have a certain culture. So those upbringing create that. Now, one thing that is unique about this group called startup is that they have a certain set of beliefs, right? And that belief is what they try to put in terms of action. And those beliefs are that, the world, the way it currently functions, is broken. Way of doing things. They're always thinking about newer way of doing things and better way of doing things. And they're always thinking about how do I do things in a greater way because I'm not happy with status quo. There are many set of people who have the complete opposite belief, and they have a different culture. But the people who are in the startup culture, they think status quo is broken, status quo is not good at all. That means that the current reality is broken, and they're always chasing for a newer world where things in the world will be better. And that they want to do by tinkering, by trying things out, as opposed to hearing lectures from others. They believe that, people who give like lectures of flying to birds are not entrepreneurs, right? They're only lecturers. So startup folks, they don't like status quo. They learn by tinkering, right? And then they always believe that something new has to be created. And through some more experience, they figure out that this is not a single man sport. This is a team sport. This is not Wimbledon. This is cricket. So there is an element of team that you have to think about. You have to not only build products, but you also have to design organizations. And through experience, they figure out that once you have come up with a new idea or a new offering, you just don't focus on building products, but you also build distributions as well. So how do you do this? It's very simple. You write down your set of core beliefs that are unchanging and core for you. Let's say you're building an e-commerce website. You think that the current way of how retail happens in the geography that you live with is broken. So how do I fix it? Why should it have be in such a situation? Why should it take like 10 days for you to get an order? Why can't it take only 1 day to get an order? And how do I figure out by trying out a lot of things? So you write down those beliefs that literally move you, write them down as a simple set of stories, and then you tell this as a story to people that are around you and attract them. And those beliefs that you have belief in, you also act it out in your action. If you say something and you do something else, people are able to recognize that and then move away. So how does one build culture in a company? They write down their core set of belief, translate them into a story. The leaders or the people involved in that structure, they talk about story. They don't explicitly call that as a story. They'll be having conversations like just you and I are having, and you will feel that yes, this guy is going after a mission, and it is an exciting journey that he's going after. So people will rally against him, whether it is investors or employees. And when employees see that day in and day out acting up, they think that, oh, this is a great place for me to work, because they care about the customers, they care about a mission, they care about their employees, and therefore this is a great set of culture. There is this great set of shared beliefs in action that I love being part of. So that's how you think about building great culture.
Okay.
All right. The next question is a little two-part, but yeah. What are some of the good books or other resources to learn which you would recommend for learning about and getting ideas with respect to entrepreneurship or actually building that type of thought process? And second, what are some of the habits which you have built over the years which differentiate you from, say, 10 or 15 years ago? Like, what habits actually get evolved or get built with time as a founder or as a while starting off?
Yeah. So usually I have a lot of book recommendation, but I'm a little stumped right now on what to recommend for entrepreneurship.
Okay.
So there are many different type of books that I talk about when it comes to specific skills of entrepreneurship. So if you're trying to learn how to build great teams, then it is different one. I would suggest the High Growth Handbook from Millard Gill. But if you're trying to figure out how to do decision making, then I would recommend the book on effectuation. Right? If you're trying to figure out how to learn marketing, then I would recommend books from Seth Godin. If you're trying to learn how to do better sales, then I would recommend books from Zig Ziglar. But there is no one specific book on entrepreneurship itself. The one that I would, the one direction that I would recommend is read autobiographies or biographies of founders. And so one book that I literally enjoyed, if somebody is feeling very hesitant in starting to read a book, I always recommend this book called Chaos Monkey. Because in college I read Sydney Sheldon. This book is Sydney Sheldon meets the startup world. It literally exposes you to the ups and downs that you go through in a typical startup world, that gives you a glimpse into the kind of people issues that you run through and how the highs are highs and the lows are lows. So that's a book that I would definitely recommend, just a general entrepreneurship book. The other one is Lost and Founder by the founder of SCM Rush, which again talks about the highs and the lows of on an entrepreneurial journey. Marketing, of late I'm loving this book called Alchemy, which I think pretty much anybody who's an entrepreneur should check out, because a lot of the value that is created is psychological, and people think the value is created only through engineering, and that's a very important lesson for every founders to learn. So Alchemy would be another book that I would recommend.
All right.
What was the second part of your question, Chandra?
Yeah, the second part, with respect to habits, what habits have actually grown with time, and what habits are very essential for entrepreneurs and startups?
I think the first this the answer to that is the first part of the question that you asked, reading,
Okay.
right? Reading is a great habit to build, and then putting yourself out outside of your zone of comfort and going and talking to people that are outside of your network, forming a good mentor network, going and talking to people and say, hey, I'm trying to do this. I've seen that you are really expert at this. Can I learn this from you? So those are two good habits to build for you to constantly put yourself into this learning mode, right? Like I said, as an entrepreneur, you have to be this fast learning machine. And if you have to be a fast learning machine, either you can learn through your own experience or you can learn through books, which are lessons that have been condensed into pages, or through another person's experience who's just recently gone through it and can share input with you. So, habits around turning yourself into a learning machine is the one that I would place as one of the most important one for a founder.
All right, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, I think the we can have the last question now, and maybe then move to the audience round. So today there are a lot of founders of top companies in India and around the world. Who say that the reason they started up was to connect the world or to help small and medium enterprises. Like they're kind of doing a social service or something like that. But there's always that burning desire for fame or for money. And I say this because these guys are really competitive. They are real competitors. So how much of what they say is actually true?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of my favorite. Uh, keep discussing this every year with one or different founders. My answer to this is very simple, and I break the answer into two parts. If the first reason that you're doing a business, if it is for money, right, then there is something wrong with why you're getting started, because that is not going to help you wake up every morning and say, okay, you know what, I'm going after this, right? So you want to have a reason to do a business which is beyond money as the first reason, right? Now the corollary or the second part to this is, if the second reason you're trying to do a business, if it is not for money, and I say business, I mean startup, the second reason is not for money, then also there is a problem. Right? Because the first reason has to be beyond money, because it is going to take that long time, 10 years, 15 years, for you to actually make it into something big and successful. So you need to have a drive which is longer than money, because if it is just money, you will feel very transactional. You will see that it's not satisfying a lot of the needs that you have in your life to make progress. But if the second reason is not money, then also it's a problem, because another way I like to say this is a hobby that makes money is a startup. A startup that does not make money is an expensive hobby. Right?
Yeah.
So you need both. And sometimes in startup it looks like there are two things which are very, very counterintuitive, and one point is trying to cancel each other. And one of the skills that you have to develop as a founder is, how do you balance two conflicting ideas? So you want to be both about money and beyond money, is one of those conflicting ideas for a startup. So you would see this pattern pretty much across many of the successful founders, where they are very mission oriented, but they are also money oriented, because you need that balance. Because if you are not money oriented, let's face it is not going to be sustainable. And if it is not sustainable, then people forget it. It did not even happen, right? So you need both mission and money.
Oh, all right, all right. So I guess yeah, we can move to the audience round. So Chandan, you can start taking the questions.
Yeah. So the first question is by Nisarg Shah. He has asked, what are the differences in the mindsets of startup founders in US and India in the lines of industry, business model, cultural differences, etc.
So one of the big differences that I've seen is the ambition. A global founder or a US founder thinks about building $1 billion businesses. right? There's 7,000 crore companies, and they have this belief that you can do this in 5 to 8 years. And Indian founder mindset is about just how do I survive, how do I get to the next level, and this $1 billion, this big thinking does not creep in as easily. There are many founders in the last 10 years who have gotten to that level, but that scale of ambition, that scale of impact is one big one, I would say. The second, and maybe it is related somehow to the first one also, is the perception of risk. The West and the US is a lot more forgiving of failures because they don't treat failures as failures. They treat failures as another step to learn, and people just forget it. Like, even if somebody came up with a startup and then they blew $1 million, the investor will write off and move forward. But in India, that $1 million will become like this haunting nightmare if a founder did not return that money, right? So failures have very different perception when it comes to an Indian culture, right? So that's why there is a lot more risk averseness that is there. But then the other thing that I would say is that the Indian mindset is really good at being very, very efficient, very, very frugal. In the US, in the West, people overspend and splurge in the experiments that they do. The Indian founders are always looking for, hey, how can I get most done in the least possible? Because they're always resource constrained. And most people think resource constraint is a bad thing, but resource constraint is what actually forces you to come up with creative solutions. These are some of the things that are different between an Indian and a Western founder.
All right. So one more question that I've got from a friend of mine. So he asks, DeepMind, OpenAI, and are research based and very different from the conventional ones. So it requires a long-term research and long-term investors. So what do you make of these kind of startups? Do you have any, their research or thing, or will they become profitable, or will it work? So
Right. So when you say investors, are you
yeah,
meaning VCs?
yeah. So will they be funded, or will they even grow well, stuff like that?
Right. So if you think about impactful ideas coming out of scientific breakthroughs and research breakthroughs, they are never funded by venture capitalists. They're always funded by universities, because the horizon of thinking for universities and venture capitalists are fundamentally different. A venture capitalist business is a 10-year cycle business. That means he borrows money from his own investors. And within the 10 years, he finds companies, finds profitable ones, and makes a lot of money from some of them and returns 3x of capital to his own investors. So he cannot wait for 30 years. His reputation, his business model requires him to find people in that 10-year window who can return him hundreds of x, so that one company can return hundreds of x, so that the 10 company that he works with, even if 9 of them fail, the 10 put together, he can return a 3x for his investors. But universities, they have a horizon of 30 years. So if you go back to history, many of the research breakthroughs that have come, they've all come through university funding, NSF funding, Department of Defense funding. And only people who have like horizons which are way beyond 10 years. Now, you might say that, hey, there were these investors who did make that funding, right? So if you look at the background of some of these investors, they would have internally had that family office backing or independent investor thinking that want to take a 30-year bet. So OpenAI and DeepMind may
Yeah,
become profitable in 20 years, but may not become profitable in 5 years or 10 years. So an investor that is only looking at a 5-year, 10-year horizon, they don't fund that. And what investors do, they're really good at timing. So they follow trends like this, and then they are like, okay, this is going to be like slow, 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 and then it is going to have a breakout here. And then they are like, okay, when that breakout happens, let me make sure that I'm there when the breakout happens. That's how many really good investors have found breakthrough companies. When Cisco was going through that breakthrough, when Google was going through that breakthrough, when Facebook was going through that breakthrough, when Uber was going through that breakthrough, they were able to identify those breakthroughs and time them and became really good. But those businesses which are going to take more than 10 years, regular venture investors don't fund them.
All right. So I'm looking at the live chat. Are there any other questions? We'll wait for I think 2 minutes, and if there are no other questions, then yeah, we can call it a wrap.
We're right about time as well, right?
All right. Oh, sorry, I
Yeah,
didn't get you.
we are right on time.
Yeah. So I think we have 2 more minutes for 7:30, and if there are no more questions, we will stop. So anyone want to ask any questions? Yeah, go ahead and put it on the chat.
I guess the not. So I guess we can. Rajan, if you can give some closing remarks, closing thoughts as such, for the to actually wrap up the session, or your final thoughts regarding the same.
Right. So we did talk a lot about startups and teams and cultures. One aspect that does come up is this whole idea of funding versus hey, do I self fund or do I start? And this is something that comes up in the mind of a lot of entrepreneurs, right? So this question is something. The way to think about this question is to say, are you trying to be? Are you a Karan Johar or are you an Anurag Kashyap? Right. So many people ask, should I get funded or should I start with this self-funded path progress? It really depends on who you are. Somebody like an Anurag Kashyap, he didn't come from the Yashraj family, so he didn't have the backings of the production studios and the budget to get started. So he literally had to use his skill to go become the director that he is celebrated as today. But Karan Johar also had a similar kind of a success. In fact, last year he had a Padma Award that he got, right? Both of them had independent success. Somebody had the network or the backing, and somebody did not. So the question is not really about whether I should go after and pitch to a studio and get the money. The best way to think about doing a startup or thinking about startup is like very similar to how many people think about going into the movie business. 9 out of 10 businesses fail. 9 out of 10 movies fail. We never know the names of the movies that fail. We only remember the Sholay and the ones that were really, really successful. 10, 20 years ago, if we wanted to get into the movie businesses, our parents would think that, we're all crazy. But today, you could do webisodes, you could go into stand-up, or you could do so many other things and become successful in the entertainment business. So it's not a question of looking at statistics or looking at what happened outside or looking at saying, hey, should I go and pitch to a studio? It is really a question of, do I have the passion? Do I have the unique skill set? Do I have the drive to go become that movie star? Because yes, like the odds are always going to be against you. How do you navigate? What is the path that you want to take to become Anurag Kashyap versus Karan Johar is the question. If you are from the back network, then you will get the funding and you can go build a great successful career. If you don't have that funding or the backing, there are people still like Anurag Kashyap who become like really celebrated director and who literally create a movement. Anurag Kashyap is credited to creating the entire indie scene in India, right? So in terms of closing thoughts that I would say is each of you should ask this question about in this new age career, which is very similar to getting into the movie business, where the world has fundamentally changed. What unique skills and what passion do I have to wanting to be successful in this? It's not a mathematical question, right? It's not a question of looking at calculation. It is really driving through what motivates you or what triggers you, and then asking yourself this question: hey, what is the network that I come from? And use that passion and the surrounding that you have, and make a calculation, make an assessment of how are you going to move forward, right? So it is really your drive and your surroundings, and figure out how long it is going to take. And if you are going to be playing this game for long enough, then both an Anurag Kashyap will also emerge and a Karan Johar will also emerge. So you have to evaluate it purely from your own perspective. So entrepreneurship is not a more riskier career than any other career that is there. It is a question of, do I have the drive and the passion for it, and how do I assess my surroundings and my support system, and how do I become successful there? And people from all walks of life, whether IITs, IIMs or not, have become successful, and that's the way to think about entrepreneurship. And one final thought I want to leave with all of you guys is that in that kind of movie business and entrepreneurship today, if in 2021 you are building a business, you should be thinking about building a SaaS business, because it is that much more less riskier to turn it into revenue. And it is possible for a lot of founders from India to build a global business as Zoho or as Freshdesk or as Chargebee or as Zenoti has shown. So a lot of people have shown that it is possible to build business. It is almost like seeing A.R. Rahman happen, right? So a lot of people have built businesses or movies from India for a global audience. And that is something that is emerging right now. So if you're building a startup, build SaaS, right? First of all, you should be thinking about building startups, right? Because it is possible for a lot of people to become successful for that. And if you're thinking about startup, then think about SaaS. If that is a message that I've been able to communicate, if that is an idea that I've been able to infect all of you with, I would say that, this hour was well worth spent.
That was
Yeah, so it's amazing, Rajan. So thanks for agreeing to join this session. And yeah, let's see if hopefully we can do maybe other future events together. Definitely, I'd ask you.
Awesome. Thank you, Chandran. Thank you, Aditya, for having me. It was a great time for me interacting with all of you guys.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone who's watching. So this was great as such.
Yeah, thanks for supporting us. All right then. So see you guys. I shall stop the stream.